Sierra, and this is Let's Bake It. Today we'll be doing a special segment called America's Identity, and we'll be making brookies. Great. For today's dessert, we're going to need flour, eggs, brown sugar, regular sugar, salt, vegetable oil, baking powder, butter, and cocoa powder. Remember to preheat the oven to 350. For part 1 out of 3, we're going to make the cookie dough. First, I'm going to mix softened butter and sugar into the mixer, and this indicates the several slave rebellions that happened. These slave rebellions were the slaves' attempt to show the people that slavery is wrong. The slaves failed every time and caused slavery to be even more brutal than what it already was in the past. A famous slave uprising was Nat Turner's Rebellion, which is where Nat Turner and several other slaves rose up and killed around 60 people, making it the bloodiest slave uprising in history. Next, I'm going to mix eggs, then flour, and baking powder into the mix. And this step symbolizes Lincoln's election shortly after the secession of the South, which eventually led to the Confederates starting a civil war with the Union. During the Civil War, Lincoln recruited slaves to fight against the Confederates and eventually gain their freedom. But long story short, the Union won against the Confederates, bringing slavery to an end and having the bloodiest war in American history. Finally, I'll stir in the chocolate chips into the cookie dough mix, and this represents the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which declared all men free, the 14th Amendment, which declared all people citizens, and the 15th Amendment, which gave all men the right to vote. Okay, now for a quick recap. So we have the slave rebellions, then Lincoln's election, next the Civil War, and finally the emancipation of slaves and the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. These major events brought America a huge step closer to having equality for all, but America still couldn't be known for equality because not everyone received equal treatment. Okay, now for part 2 out of 3. I'm going to make the brownie mix. First, mix all the dry ingredients, and this symbolizes the Jim Crow laws being passed, meaning blacks and whites were separate but equal, which wasn't true at all. Blacks received far worse treatment than the whites and also didn't have anything as nice as the whites did. Next, I'm going to mix softened butter and vegetable oil into the mixer, and this symbolizes the several boycotts and protests that happened to bring segregation to an end and equality for all. A very important event that led to many more protests and boycotts was the day that Rosa Parks was arrested for not giving up her seat to a white man. Now I'm adding in the eggs, which represents the Brown versus Board of Education. The decision was that segregation of education for blacks and whites was unconstitutional. This is a very important step toward equality for all because now blacks and whites receive the same education. Fun fact of the day! The very first African American to attend an all-Caucasian school was Ruby Bridges, and she started her first day on September 8th, 1954. Bonus fun fact! 9 African American students were the first to attend an all-Caucasian high school on September 25th, 1957, and this important day is known as Little Rock Night. Finally, I'm going to add in the dry ingredients, and this symbolizes Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous "I Have a Dream" speech and the end of segregation. MLK's speech talks about how he dreams of no discrimination and everyone will receive equality. Almost a year after his speech, a bill was passed ending segregation. Okay, time for another recap. After the end of slavery, Jim Crow laws were passed, creating segregation and equality. The unequal treatments caused several protests and boycotts to attempt to end segregation. Then we have the Brown versus Board decision deeming separation of schools for blacks and whites unconstitutional. Shortly after, MLK gave his "I Have a Dream" speech, and a year later, segregation came to an end. Now that segregation is over, you'd think that America will have equality for everyone. Now for part 3 out of 3. First, I'm going to grease the pan with about 1.5 tablespoons of vegetable oil and the remains of the flour that wasn't used. And this represents the violent outbreaks and discriminations that happened after segregation, like Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination and police brutalities. Next, I'm going to pour the brownie mix into the pan and add the cookie dough on top. And this step indicates the violent outbreaks dying down, but there's still being discrimination toward African Americans, like African Americans having a much harder time getting employed than Caucasians, and discrimination against voting. After mixing both mixes into the pan, I'll let the brookie bake for about 45 minutes. After it bakes, I'll let the brookie cool for at least an hour, and then I'll cut the brookie into 24 squares and serve. And this symbolizes the America that we have today, which isn't 100% equal, but has come a very long way. Inequality is a part of America's identity because it is still a problem that we have every day. While America is striving to have equality for all, we can never get there because not everyone can see that everyone is the same when everyone is created equal. This brookie symbolizes America's identity because the brookie isn't exactly 50% cookie, 50% brownie, and it's not even close. But it is still a very popular dessert, kind of like how America is with the world.